you. So I grew up here. My nieces and my nephew are in the front row, and I just saw my dad come in, but he appears to have wandered off into another section of the bookstore. It's okay, he's heard me read before. So I'm so excited to be back here. Cannot even tell you how excited. Even though I'm an author, there are not words. I miss the landscape, I miss everything. So, this evening what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to start with a tiny little puppet show. And this is a historic show from 1784 called The Broken Bridge. It is actually in chapter 10 of Shades of Milk and Honey. And then I'm going to move on to reading a little bit for you, and then we'll finish up with a little bit of a question and answer. And really, I'll just let you know that I will answer anything. I might lie, but I will answer it. So The Broken Bridge, which is what this show is, was one of the most popular puppet plays in Europe at a time when puppetry was kind of the thing. People loved shadow puppets. This particular play ran for 60 years. I'm doing a very abbreviated version of it for you. You will probably catch my hands. This is my dad. Hi, Dad. Sorry. He just drove in from Tennessee. Mom and Dad have just sit in the front row. You made me. You get to see all of this. And seriously, the second book is dedicated to my parents because Mom was an arts administrator. Dad's an extremely talented amateur musician, and they've both been incredibly supportive my entire life. So when you have parents who, when you say, I think I'm going to be a professional puppeteer, and they say, okay, you know you scored. All right, so The Broken Bridge. Tra-la-la, tra-la-la, tra-la-la-la-la, tra-la-la, tra-la-la. Excuse me, tra-la-la, excuse me, sir. Tra-la-la, excuse me. Is this the road to London? Oh, no. This here don't go nowhere but to the river. Tra-la-la. Oh, well, can one cross the river? Oh, aye. Ducks cross the river. Quack, quack. Tra-la-la. Oh, well, how far across is the river? When you're in the middle, you're halfway across. Tra-la-la. Oh, well, how deep is the river? Gravel touches the bottom. Tra-la-la. Oh, if I were on the other side of the river, I'd tra-la-la you. Tra-la-la. Oh, tra-la-la. Oh, tra-la-la. Tra-la-la, tra-la-la. Tra-la-la, 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 tra-la, 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 whoa! Tra-la-la-la. So in the original production, the puppets were probably about this big, made out of leather. It was a much longer play. There was a recalcitrant donkey, crocodile, because they're so common in London. I'm, instead of using the donkey skin, I'm using the somewhat more traditional Trader Joe's boxes. Yes. And this is, in the original, this probably would have been an oilcloth of some sort, either canvas or silk. I am using white shower curtain. This is, by the way, a really easy project to do at home if you have the urge to do some shadow puppetry, if you have young folks in your life. So now we move on to the reading portion of the evening. How many people here have read any of the books in the series? All right. Significant number here. That's very exciting. So I will give you a choice. I will either read to you a little bit from Without a Summer, which is the book that is out right now, or if you would like, I can read to you a little bit from book 4. I'm seeing some 4s going up there. Book 4 does not come out until 2014. It's called Valor and Vanity. It takes place in the year 1816. And this is an excerpt. I've managed to cut out all of the spoilers for the previous books, except for Napoleon, who's kind of, you know, Napoleon. So this is
part of the first chapter of Valor and Vanity. It may be stated with some certainty that travel, however much one might hold one's companions in high regard, can be trying to the most steady of characters. Yet this is also the surest way to expand that character by exposing it to influences other than those familiar surroundings of home. This is, perhaps, why so many families chose to make their tour of the continent now that the danger from Napoleon was past after his defeat by Wellington at the Battle of Quatre Bras. It was, however, with some trepidation that Jane, Lady Vincent, found herself on a tour of the continent with her family. Her last visit to the continent had ended abruptly when Napoleon had escaped exile and rained terror on France for 100 days. Some part of her could not help but expect him to escape again. The troubles she faced with this tour, however, were of the mundane sort: which carriage to take, how to arrange quarters for their party, and most of all, how to manage her mother's nerves. Those nervous complaints had been a constant companion on their meandering path across Europe. Jane was relieved that they were now in the free imperial city of Trieste, where she and her husband would separate from the rest of the family. Her father and Melody she would be sorry to say farewell to, but not even her fondness for her mother could quite subdue her relief at their impending departure. Fair weather had favored them, and their last morning in the city had been filled with balmy breezes off the Gulf of Venice, which gave glad tidings for the voyage that they would take shortly to Venice, and from there to Murano. "Lady Vincent! Sir David!" Mrs. Ellsworth's voice cut through even the hubbub of the docks. She would insist on using their honorifics, no matter how much Jane or Vincent protested. She was so proud of being able to say, "My daughter's husband, Sir David Vincent, the Prince Regent's glamourist," at every available opportunity, that it seemed cruel to deny her the fun. Jane's sister, Melody, giggled, anticipating the display that was about to come. "You need not enjoy it. You will have her attention soon enough." Jane released her sister's arm to meet their mother. Her father, Mr. Ellsworth, had his hand at her mother's back as though he were supporting her, but she walked with all the swiftness of a governess in pursuit of a small child. Jane was very much the focal point of her march across the docks. It boded to be exactly the overwrought farewell that Jane had most wished to avoid. "You must not go!" Mrs. Ellsworth came to a halt in front of them, with a hand pressed to her bosom. "Charles, tell them that they must not go!" Jane's father cleared his throat. His thinning white hair fluttered under his top hat, and in the morning light seemed almost like a mist.
"My dear, your mother wishes me to tell you that you must not go."
"You must make more of a protest than that! Lady Vincent, Sir David, I implore you not to take ship." "Mamma, they must take a ship. It is an island. One does not simply walk into Murano." I have no idea why you're laughing.
"Just so. And Lord Byron is expecting us in Venice."
Vincent offered a bow to her mother. This was the reason they had given for separating from the party, though the truth had more to do with the glassmakers on the neighboring island of Murano. That they were going to work would have required explanation, and Mrs. Ellsworth was not given to discretion. If they had once told her that they had created a way of recording glamour and glass, the entire continent would know. Thank heavens that Lord Byron's extended stay in Venice provided them an excuse to visit. With her mother, the invocation of a lord was usually more than sufficient to distract her. Alas, that seemed to not be the case on the morning in question. "But last night, one of the serving men at our hotel told one of the maids who told our Nancy that there were pirates on the Gulf of Venice. And then today, in the baths, a woman spoke of barber sailors." Vincent was taken with a sudden fit of coughing. Clearing his throat, he said, "I believe you mean Barbary corsairs, madam." "There, you see! Sir David knows about the pirates."
"I'm afraid that I do not."
Melody tossed her golden curls. "La, we have said as much before. The last of the corsairs were defeated by the American fleet, so these waters are quite as safe as any." Oh, it is too much! Sir David, I implore you!" Jane stepped forward to save her husband. "While I am grateful for your concern, we are in no danger. The passage is swifter than the overland journey, and we have told Lord Byron that we are coming. You would not wish us to be disrespectful to his lordship, would you?" Mr. Ellsworth patted her arm.
"There, you see, my dear."
Melody joined Jane's father in soothing Mrs. Ellsworth. Mamma, the Barbary corsairs, even when they were sailing, were on the Mediterranean. This is the Gulf of Venice. Oh, but... Her newest protestation was cut short by a cabin boy who ran up to Vincent and bobbed a bow. In rapid Italian, he asked pardon for interrupting and explained that the captain wanted them to board now. Vincent thanked the young man in flawless Italian. Turning back to the party gathered on the dock, he offered a bow. We must take our leave. The next few moments passed in a jumble of heartfelt farewells. Mrs. Ellsworth abandoned her attempts to prevent them from leaving, though she did make copious use of her handkerchief. After so much time traveling together, Jane had to admit to some melancholy at separating from the rest of the party, but it was with great relief that she followed Vincent up the gangplank and aboard the ship. The departure from Trieste had the familiar rhythms of any sea voyage, as sailors called to each other in voices that seemed brined from their time at sea. Ropes, thick as Jane's wrist, got tossed from dock to ship, casting them off. For a moment, the ship seemed to lumber as a tug pulled it away from the dock. Then the sails rose, catching the air with their flutter till they filled and the ship was underway. The time aboard passed with more speed than Jane anticipated, as she stared across the waves and relished these idle moments with Vincent, away from the constant requirements of her family. The salt air carried her attention away across the waves. It seemed that they had but just left Trieste when the captain announced that they were already halfway to Venice. She sat with Vincent in the bow of the ship, using a coil of rope as their bench. The ship skipped over the brilliant aquamarine waves, tossing the salt spray back into their faces. The remnants of the nuncheon they had packed in Trieste sat between them, the crumbs of a pastry sharing space on oilcloth with dried figs. Vincent lifted a silver travel cup and peered into it. One wonders what wine Homer was drinking when he spoke of the wine-dark sea. Certainly no vintage known, if it matched the sea. Jane inhaled the sea air, pressing her ribs against her short stays. That color. I cannot imagine a glamour that would recreate something so vibrant. Forgetting for a moment the effect of travel on glamour, she reached into the ether and pulled forth a fold. The ship's motion pulled the glamour out of her fingers before she could make even a single twist. It rippled like an oil slick in the air before vanishing back into the air. Jane blushed at her foolishness. Even walking a few steps took enormous energy to work glamour, and here she had tried to work it on a moving ship. The inability to work glamour at sea was what had given Lord Nelson the advantage against Napoleon's fleet during the blockade. Do that again. Vincent set his cup down on the deck. His gaze took on the vacant stare of someone looking deep into the ether. Have you an idea?
Merely a curiosity, which might become an idea later.
You intrigue me. Jane reached for the glamour again. It slid through her hands so that she almost could not catch it in the first place. She lost control of the fold. It tickled under fingertips and sprang into the air. Jane laughed in surprise at the rainbow, which spread and shimmered.
I have not had the opportunity to see glamour dissolve like this. Only read the theory.
Vincent reached into the ether himself. His fingers hooked on a fold, tightening. Then it sprang free. The coruscating colors flowed back in the ship's wake. He turned to watch it, and a slow smile spread across his face. He reached for the glamour again, snatching wildly like a kitten reaching for a feather. Again, it tugged free of his fingers. Vincent threw his head back and laughed. Giggling, Jane joined him. She could only imagine what the Prince Regent would say if he could see his favorite glamourists essentially blowing soap bubbles with glamour. There was something delightful about the sheer wildness of it. Jane pulled another fold out and spread her fingers as she released it, fracturing the rainbow into a half-dozen pieces. Look, the way you release it affects the shape of the oil slick? Vincent grinned.
Apt name. Perhaps light slick.
Oiled light?
Glam oil?
Perhaps not.
He laughed and cupped his hand so the glamour slid over his palm in a patchwork cord of undulating light. I recall Young experimenting with using multiple glamours to try to stabilize the glamour.
Did it work?
Not even a little.
The lookout shouted from the crow's nest, his words snatched away so that only his tone reached them. The ship's crew suddenly sprang into action, raising sails as the boat became an explosion of canvas. Jane looked toward the horizon in front of them. Not Venice so soon.
No. Vincent stood slowly looking behind them. It is absurd that my first thought is a desire to keep this from your mother. The look of dread on his face made Jane turn in her seat. A ship sailed toward them, and even to her untutored eye, the cannons upon its deck were obvious.
Is that?
A Barbary corsair. Yes. Vincent gave her a small, tight smile. May I ask you to go below, Muse? I believe we are about to be boarded by pirates. That comes out in 2014. I probably should have warned you that the first chapter ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger. So one of the other things that I do with these books is that I very much enjoy finding ways to fit history into them. I mentioned that they are going to visit Lord Byron. Lord Byron was, in fact, in Venice in 1816. He had actually been there for a couple of years. And so I managed to time things out to periods in which he was actually there and periods in when he was actually away. Now, here's an interesting thing. There's about a 2-week period where Lord Byron is more or less unaccounted for. And he's traveling during this period when he was coming from England to Venice. One of his traveling companions was someone that he called the Doctor. This is Dr. Polidori. But frequently in the correspondence he just says, the Doctor and I. And I'm just like, well, clearly. And in all of my other books, I have inserted a Doctor Who cameo. I can tell you where to find them and the whole thing. So I decided that I would go ahead and insert one into here because obviously. So I'm just going to read a tiny, tiny bit from this. So this is deeper in the book. It probably does not come out as a surprise that they do eventually get away from the pirates, or it would be a very short book. So this is pretty deep in, and they are with Lord Byron. And I'm just going to let you try to guess which Doctor it is. Lord Byron had set his own stamp upon the space with his collection of oddities picked up in his travels. Key among these were his menagerie of animals. Dogs roamed the palazzo freely, lounging on sofas or curled up in front of the hearth. A monkey sat perched atop the valance, spanning a great window overlooking the canal, and another hopped onto Lord Byron's shoulder the moment they entered the palazzo. The little gray creature remained there as they entered the drawing room, and Lord Byron reached up to scratch the fur under its tiny chin. It's okay, because it's my dad. I'll wait.
And it's your mother.
Oh, yes. Do you want to go ahead and answer? Can I talk to her? So the little gray creature remained there as they entered the drawing room, and Lord Byron reached up to scratch the fur under its tiny chin. He walked with a slight roll that nearly masked the lameness in his right foot. As much as he collected animals, the poet appeared to collect people as well. He nodded to individuals as they passed through the palazzo. A man in a gondolier's uniform read with his feet up on a coffee table. A young woman in half-dress ate bonbons on the balcony. Another man wrote at the desk. And an odd young man in a fez fiddled with a lock on a door. Barbary corsairs, as it turns out, were fezzes. Because fezzes are cool. It's just like, well, this is pretty darn clear exactly what I need to be doing. So, now we have reached the portion of the evening where I am available to answer questions. And I really can answer questions on any range of stuff, from the writing life, questions about the books, where to find the Doctor Who cameos, puppetry, Regency underwear. Wait, my dad is here. We'll answer that question with caution. So, do you have any questions at all?
Do you want to talk to your mother?
Yeah. Hey, Mom. Oh, look, you're on speakerphone. I'm in front of my reading right now. Okay. Love you. We can call her later.
I figured she needed to know that.
Yeah. So I saw hands go. Emily.
What's the time period of the books? That's a very good question. So the first book starts in 1814. 1815 is Glamour and Glass, and that is when Napoleon escapes from Elba and we start into what they call the 100 Days, and it's the time leading up to the Battle of Waterloo. And I didn't actually plant her, but 1816 is when this one takes place, The Year Without a Summer. So the reason this book is called Without a Summer is because 1816 was the year without a summer. In 1815, a volcano went off, Tambora, and it kicked so much ash into the air that we had global cooling, to the point that we had snow in Washington, D.C. in July. Yeah, it was pretty bad. Something in the order of 92,000 people died. So part of the reason that I picked that was because it was a very interesting period. The other thing that was going on in 1816 is that you had the Luddites. So we described this as Jane Austen's Emma meets the Luddite Rebellion in The Year Without a Summer. So there was massive unemployment because you had all of these soldiers coming back from the Napoleonic Wars. There were huge food shortages because of the terrible, terrible weather. Even in places where it wasn't snowing, they just had constant rain. In fact, if you guys are familiar with, you know Frankenstein. So Mary Shelley wrote that in 1816, and one of the things that you read a lot is that that the weather was horrible and that they had stayed inside, although they were vacationing in Italy. I think they were vacationing. And they had gone inside to escape the terrible, cold, wet, miserable weather. And it's August. And that is The Year Without a Summer. So one of the things that I'm doing in this book is playing a lot with those historic events and the way they were affecting society at the time. So it's dealing with all kinds of class and social unrest. And that, the period is actually called the Regency because that's the Prince Regent was in power at that point because his dad was crazy. You guys know about that. Yes?
So why did you choose weaving as a metaphor for glamour?
That's a very good question. I like this crowd. Why did I choose weaving as a metaphor for glamour? I wanted this to be a womanly art. I wanted it to fit in with needlepoint and music and dancing, and so it seemed natural to me that women would have picked words as a metaphor that they were familiar with. And a lot of what they're doing is, they really are, they're braiding things together. And so sometimes it is a metaphor and sometimes it's actually not. That is what they are doing. But that's why I wanted it to all be textile based.
A couple of years ago, you had a chapter by chapter book that was completely different from this. It was like set in a completely different time, I thought. And
1907?
Right.
Yes.
And wonder what happened to that book and when is it?
So one of the things that I do when I am writing, and this is true for all of my novels and my short stories as well, is that as I go along, I will post chapters on my website under password protection. So if you ask me for the password, I will let you read it. Typically, I wind up between 10 to 20 people actually reading along. 70 people will ask me for the password, but and that's because I come from a theater background, so I work better when I have a collaborative environment. I like getting immediate audience reaction. So the book that Samuel is asking about was called Passing Fair. It is completely different magic system, set in 1907, and the pitch goes like this. 1907, Nashville, Tennessee. A young black actress is using magic to pass as white. Murder, political intrigue, interracial romance, and vaudeville. We are shopping it. We have been for a while. We are shopping it to both speculative fiction and mainstream editors. We're having a little trouble. One of the rejections we got said, and this is a quote, that she found it politically worrisome to have a black character passing as white, to which I wanted to say, yes. That is, in fact, sort of the point of the book. So we've gotten a lot of people saying that they don't know how to position it. We hope it will sell. We may have to go to a smaller press, but you know, it's out there. It's out there shopping right now. So did you? So yes.
Sort of on the question. Both of us were trying to imagine what she's just started.
Oh, okay.
So,
sorry, you totally. I know you totally know who marries who, but you don't know how they met, or you don't know how they hook up. Sorry about that.
I figured it out.
Yeah.
But she was asking how if it's just ether, how it comes and you make a deer out of it or a tree.
Right. So how does glamour work? Okay, so this is the science behind the glamour that I do not put on the page in the book because some of the words they didn't have. And some of the words they did, but it just didn't seem appropriate. So basically what is happening with glamour, the visual glamour, glamour in general. So glamour is manipulation of waveform. What they're doing specifically with visual glamour is they're manipulating the electromagnetic spectrum. In the Geek story, way before these books started, fairy and the mortal world never separated. So they just interbred, and everybody can do glamour the same way elves could. Much reduced, but that's actually where the word comes from. It's an old word that really literally meant magic used to make yourself more beautiful. What they are able to do is to pierce the veil between the mortal world and fairy, essentially. They're able to reach into the ether, and at the time, ether has been debunked since, but at the time people thought that ether was something that filled all of the space between things. So essentially what they're doing is they're reaching out, they're grabbing light, and they're able to manipulate it. And they do have to have physical contact with it. You can use any part of your body, but most people tend to do it with their hands. You have to, because it is connected to the physical world, walking with it takes an enormous amount of energy because you have to constantly be adjusting the lengths and different distances, which is why they don't walk with it very much at all. The farther you get outside of the visible spectrum, the more difficult it becomes to work the glamour. So when you get into cold mongering, which is basically they're doing a thermodynamic transfer. When you get into cold mongering, it's a really complicated weave. It takes a lot of energy, and you're in a part of the spectrum that is not completely safe for people to handle. So I spent way too much time thinking about this. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to geek about that. Did that answer it?
No, that's exactly what I was looking for.
Okay.
Because I've been wondering about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
And what you said about the language, I was fascinated. I listened to your writing excuses
okay.
too. And when you were talking about the dictionary that you created for your spell check, using Jane Austen words that she were in her books, are you still continuing that with the other books?
Yes, and I should. So basically, what I did with the first book, I didn't have this, and I got annoyed because I kept having anachronisms, and it's really hard to spot language that is no longer in use. You know, it's just, you know this word, and without looking up every single word, it was just, ugh. So for the second book, I created a Jane Austen spell check dictionary. And basically I took the complete works of Jane Austen, turned it into a unique word list, used that as my spell check dictionary. So it flags every word she didn't use. And that allows me to go and look it up. And I use the Oxford Historical Thesaurus, which I think the Wake County Public Library will give you access to the electronic one, and if you can, it is one of the sexiest tools I have ever seen in my entire life. It gives you synonyms in the order in which they came into the language. So that allowed me to look up words, find synonyms that were period appropriate, but were also things that a modern reader would understand. Because if someone hit a word and goes, my, that's authentic, I have completely lost them. So not every word in there is a word that Jane Austen used, but every word in there is a word that she could have used. There were also words that Jane Austen used that I am not allowed to use. Things like electrify will sound like an anachronism if I use it. but that was totally fair game for her. And she, in fact, uses it in, I think in Emma. It might be in Pride and Prejudice, but she uses it at least once. So yes, I'm continuing to do that. But I find language reflects culture, and culture reflects language. It's this back and forth thing. So a lot of times I will, I think probably at least, it feels like at least once per chapter, but that's probably exaggerating. But several times in each book, I would hit a word for which there was not a synonym, because it was dealing with a concept that they just weren't dealing with as a thing. You'd have to unpack it several layers into a long sentence in order to express it. One of the examples, I'm trying to have a measured reaction, which is actually in this book. And reaction as an idea of a response that is going on internally, the way people dealt with self was very different. If you look at the word conscious, he had a conscious look about him. That is a synonym for the modern way you'd say that is, he looked self-conscious. But because their relationship to self was so different, if you were conscious, then you were conscious of yourself. It's like the whole thing is very, very different. So there was a lot of unpacking, and then sometimes having to work around the concept or unpack it in different ways that it made sense for a modern reader. And there were also things that made sense to them that to us is just like, little wacky people. So, fun stuff. Anyone else? Yes.
If Jane and Vincent could just reach out and grab the ether and make circles, why didn't the sailors discover it?
Well, it's not much good. It doesn't do much use. That's a really good question that I will probably have to address before this book comes out. Oh, cool, thank you. That's much prettier than my... for the most part, it takes excess energy. I imagine that they might have done some form of glamour, but two things are going on. One is that Jane and Vincent are highly, highly skilled. And so the fact that I'm making this up as I go to totally justify this. Jane and Vincent are highly, highly skilled. So the fact that they're, and as skilled as they are, they're having trouble even catching the glamour. I suspect that a sailor who has no experience, who doesn't have any practical experience with glamour, would have difficulty doing it. Jane's father has difficulty seeing glamour, and although everyone can technically do it, it's like saying everyone can pick up a paintbrush and paint. So my suspicion, and I'll have to think about it now, but my suspicion is that I can totally justify it as something that they just wouldn't have ever developed a skill for, because most of them go to sea when they're little, and that's when you start learning to shift your vision back and forth, so that they just not something they think about.
Would class also have been an issue for them?
Yes, absolutely. Would class have been an issue? Absolutely. Because glamour takes energy. If you do too much glamour, you tend to overheat. This is why a lot of ladies were fainting. So in order to do glamour at any kind of artistic level, you needed leisure time. It's very much a leisure class activity, the same way painting and music and dancing and embroidery were. That there are folk art forms of those, but the doing it with the level of refinement that is going on with Jane and Vincent, you need a lot of spare time to practice, and then you need the excess energy and, frankly, the food to be able to support that. So yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing that I deal with to a degree in without a summer is that the coldmongers tend to be the ones who are tend to be lower class because of the toll it takes on you. So coldmongers tend to die young, and part of it is because they're lower class and underfed, but part of it is because no one wealthy is willing to do something that's fairly risky. So.
I think we have time for one more.
All right, one more question. Do we have one more question? Yes.
I have one for the the Light Rebellion and the Coldmongers, were you replacing, I'm not going to put that history time period, were you replacing anything, or was that the Coldmongers something you put in?
The coldmongers are something that I put in. I based them on a number of different things that were going on at the time. I based them on the Luddites. The Luddites had really more or less stopped by 1813 or 1814, when the major leaders of the rebellion were beheaded, which, kind of puts a damper on things. So I was basing it on that. I was also basing it on a lot of the food riots that were going on. There's something called Peterloo, which was, and I think Peterloo is the year, I think it's 1818. But basically it was a peaceful march in which the English soldiers fired on the people who were marching, and they were marching from St. Peter's Square, I think. Peterloo because of Waterloo. So I was basing it on those things, and then also something called the Cato Street Conspiracy, which is in the 1820s, which I stumbled upon when I was looking for language, was looking for how the English law handled treason. And this kind of uprising and protest, and it was basically a case where there was some entrapment going on by an agent of the crown. And one of the things that I ran across when I was looking at the Cato Street Conspiracy, which shaped a lot of what happened in the book, is that one of the people who was the chief, there were 4 people who were the chief conspirators, who were kind of organizing everything, and he was a man of color. And that was actually the phrase that was period correct, was man of color, woman of color. And one of the things that he said in the trial was, the trial lawyer said, you were seen going over the bridge. And he said, are you certain it was me and not some other man of color? We are often mistaken for each other. And I was like, well then, nothing has really changed. So I knew that London was a very cosmopolitan city, and I knew that there were people of all nationalities and ethnicities, and so I was determined that in this book it was not going to be an all-white cast. So I've got the coldmongers are, and again, this is me, I'm answering. Sorry, this is way more than you just asked. When you said we had time for one more question, you didn't know how long I could talk. I'll wrap this up I get this from Dad. No. I thought I would try to shift the blame there. So basically what I decided was that since coldmongering was predominantly done by lower class, I had already made the decision that in the Americas, that slaves were mostly used for that. And in England at the time, although slavery was still legal in the empire, it was not legal in England. So once you set foot on English soil, if you were a slave, you were free. So I figured that all of the coldmongers, particularly in London, were probably of mixed descent, that they were probably all at least somewhat descended from slaves. And so I've got the coldmongers, and then I also have 2 characters of Anglo-Indian descent, which was the other thing that I ran into while researching this, was that there were basically East India Company. A lot of people, all of these men went over to India and were marrying women, and then they would send their children back home. And so the thing that was fascinating was that if the child was British father and Indian mother, they were sent to England for education. and generally upper class, and frequently the touch of the tawny was overlooked because they were usually children of very, very wealthy men. If they were the child of an English woman and an Indian man, they were generally lower class and stayed in India. It was really, it's this whole completely messed up thing, which is, and a lot of that found its way into the book, although not always in the, and now we will talk about race, but it's, but yes, so all of that is based on stuff and substituting and a mix. That was a very long answer.
We want to thank you very much.